Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night because today we're talking about the 1950 film All About Eve. I feel like I'm talking about in my recent videos about my favourite old Hollywood films because All About Eve was one of the first classic films I watched when I was 14 years old. I remember I just come back from Los Angeles and I had seen the Madame Tussauds wax figure of Bette Davis as Margot Channing from All About Eve, and I remember kind of being so taken by it and haunted by it. That one and Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard, both of them were like, I was just like, who are you women? So I came home and I bought the DVD of All About Eve. Yes, the DVD, the pre-streaming years, and I still have the DVD. That's why it's important to have physical media. I watched it and I became obsessed with that movie and Bette Davis. I remember I went and got her biography and was reading it. I was like, this woman is amazing. She's such a good actress. And so All About Eve is a very, very special film for me. And for good reason, because All About Eve received a record 14 nominations at the 23rd Academy Awards in 1951 and won 6 of them, including Best Picture and Best Director. So what makes All About Eve so very, very special to not only me, but the world? Let's get into it. Hollywood in 1950 was full of glamour, power, and betrayal. It still is. And no film captures the ruthless ambition of show business quite like All About Eve. This is a movie about the dark side of fame, featuring one of the greatest performances in cinema history. This movie is a masterpiece, but also a battlefield because behind the scenes, the drama was just as cutthroat as the film itself. In All About Eve, we follow the rise of the ambitious young actress Eve Harrington, played by Baxter, as she manipulates and deceives her way to the top, at the expense of the legendary actress Margot Channing, played by the one and only Bette Davis. On the surface, Eve is sweet, humble, and devoted, but underneath, a calculating, power-hungry mastermind. And let's be honest, Hollywood has always loved a good villain. The story of All About Eve originated in an anecdote told to author Mary Orr by actress Elizabeth Bergner. Bergner, while performing in the play The Two Mrs. Carrolls in 1943, allowed a young fan to become a part of her household as her assistant. But she later regretted it when the young woman attempted to undermine her. Orr used this as the basis of her short story, The Wisdom of Eve, that was released in 1946. And when Joseph L. Mankiewicz read this, he thought it would be the perfect movie. He presented Darryl F. Zanuck, one of the co-founders of 20th Century Fox, a film treatment, and Zanuck saw the potential too. Zanuck himself chose the title, All About Eve, and he took it from the opening scene in which Addison DeWitt, played gorgeously by George Sanders, tells us, the audience, that soon we will hear more about Eve. All about Eve, in fact. With a script complete, a director and a producer eager to go, all that was needed was a great cast, and if only that was so simple. Bette Davis wasn't the first choice for Margot Channing. Originally, Claudette Colbert had the role, but had a back injury and she was forced to drop out. Then, Ingrid Bergman, but she'd recently fallen in love with Roberto Rossellini and didn't want to leave Italy. So here enters Bette Davis, fresh off a career slump, battling studio politics and desperate for a role to prove that she was still a force to be reckoned with. And boy, did she prove it. Bette Davis was 42 during the filming of All About Eve, practically ancient in 1950s Hollywood. When you're over 40, you're either a side character or a mother. In an industry notorious for its ageism, especially towards women, Davis's portrayal of Margot, a seasoned actress confronting the inevitability of aging, was really poignant. The role resonated deeply, reflecting Davis's own challenges in a business that often sidelines women over 40. Over 30, more like it. I'm 30 now, I'm out. Because, does it sound familiar? Even today, Hollywood still struggles with this. Leading men in their 50s get paired with love interests in their 20s, while actresses over 40 fight for scraps. It's slowly changing, with icons like Nicole Kidman leading the way. But All About Eve took that reality of 1950 and turned it into one of the most biting, unforgettable stories in cinema history. Davis poured her own experiences into Margot Channing, and this wasn't just acting, it was personal and poignant and powerful.
Bill's in love with Margot Channing. He's fought with her, worked with her, and loved her. But 10 years from now, Margot Channing will have ceased to exist. And what's left will be what?
Margot, Bill is all of 8 years younger than you.
And those years stretch as the years go on. I've seen it happen too often.
And what about Anne Baxter as Eve? Oh, she was perfect. So perfect that the lines between fiction and reality started to blur just a fraction. Rumours swirled that Baxter, much like her character, was gunning for Davis's spotlight. And this kind of was proven when awards season came around, and Baxter insisted on being submitted for Best Actress at the Academy Awards rather than Best Supporting Actress, directly competing with Bette Davis. And guess what? Neither of them won. But there was one expected plot twist during the making of All About Eve. There was romance blossoming on this set. Gary Merrill, who played Margot's lover Bill Sampson, found himself absolutely enamoured with Bette Davis. Their on-screen chemistry quickly transitioned off-screen, leading to a whirlwind romance. The two married in 1950, shortly after the film's release, and the day that Merrill's divorce from his first wife, Barbara Leeds, was finalised. However, this marriage was tumultuous. Both Davis and Merrill had fiery personalities, leading to frequent clashes. Their union was filled with passion and volatility, and it lasted a decade before culminating in divorce in 1960. Davis would later say, "Strong women only marry weak men." Celeste Holm, who played Karen Richards, the wife of playwright Lloyd Richards, so perfectly, didn't have a very pleasant time with Bette Davis either. Spoke about her experience with Davis on the first day of shooting, stating, "I walked onto the set on the very first day and said good morning, and do you know her reply? She said, 'Oh shit, good manners.' I never spoke to her again. Ever." Yikes. Years later, this is so silly. Years later, Bette Davis would later reply, "Filming All About Eve was a very happy experience. The only bitch in the cast was Celeste Holm. Nothing quite like a good old-fashioned Hollywood feud." And then there was Marilyn Monroe. A young, unknown actress at the time, Monroe had a small but unforgettable role in the film as Miss Caswell. The inexperienced actress was cowed by Davis, and it took 11 takes to complete a scene. And when Davis barked at her, Monroe left the set to vomit. And honestly, I don't blame her. I do the exact same thing. But despite the harsh treatment, Monroe really stole this scene. It was a preview of what was to come. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just another pretty face. She was an absolute icon in the making.
Oh, waiter.
That isn't a waiter, my dear. That's a butler.
Well, I can't yell, "Oh, butler," can I? Maybe somebody's name is Butler.
You have a point. An idiotic one, but a point.
I don't want to make trouble. All I want is a drink.
Leave it to me. I'll get you one.
Thank you, Mr. Fabian.
Well done. I can see your career rising in the east like the sun.
When All About Eve hit theatres, critics and audiences alike lost their minds. Harrison Reports called it a fascinating, continually absorbing story about Broadway theatrical people, giving immature treatment and penetrated with realistic dialogue and flashes of slick, sardonic humour. And the Oscars? These were a battlefield all of their own. It received a record-breaking 14 Academy Award nominations, the most of any film at the time. Bette Davis was expected to win Best Actress. Of course she was. It was easily one of her best performances, if not one of the best performances of all time. But the award went to Judy Holliday for Born Yesterday. Many believe that Anne Baxter's decision to compete in the same category split the vote, costing Davis her third Oscar. Yikes. I've said yikes so many times throughout this video. That's why I love so much that Ariana Grande was nominated for Best Supporting Actress this year and Cynthia Erivo for Best Actress at the Academy Awards. They gave each other an even chance. And an Oscar is an Oscar. Lead or Best Supporting, I'd take any. All About Eve did win Best Picture, Best Director. George Sanders took home Best Supporting Actor for his role as the ruthless critic Addison DeWitt. I think when I was rewatching it this week, I think he is my favourite character. He's just too good. I just love his performance. Best Screenplay, Best Costume Design, and Best Sound Recording. So it did pretty okay in the end. All About Eve is one of the most celebrated films of all time. And Bette Davis would later admit in a 1983 interview that Mankiewicz, casting her in this film, saved her career. "He resurrected me from the dead." This movie has been referenced, studied, and quoted for over 70 years, and even The Simpsons paid homage in 2008, a high honour in my eyes, with an episode titled All About Lisa, showing how much impact this film still has on pop culture. And I just love this movie. I have a handful of movies that I love to rewatch time and time again, and this is one of them. The performances, the chemistry between the cast, the dialogue, the direction, the cinematography. This, in my eyes, is a perfect film, and you can totally see why today it's considered one of the greatest films of all time. The part of the movie that stays with me the most, though, that final scene when Eve, the young actress who betrayed everyone, finds herself being worshipped herself by another ambitious newcomer, Phoebe, played by Barbara Bates. When Phoebe puts on Eve's cloak, holds her award, and looks at herself in front of all of those mirrors, it's chilling. A vicious, never-ending cycle and a warning from Hollywood itself to be careful who you step on when climbing to the top, because someone younger, hungrier, and more ruthless is always watching. I remember when I was 18 and my acting coach at the time, my biggest dream was to be a movie star at 18, and my acting coach at the time said to me I should always remain on my toes and be at my best, because someone better, younger, and prettier will always be one step behind me. And I remember at the time I was like, that's so rude. How dare you? I'm 18. I'm going to be a big movie star. Now I reflect on it, he was right. Hollywood, baby. So what do you think of All About Eve? Did it deserve all the praise? And was Bette Davis robbed of an Academy Award for her performance? The answer to those two questions is yes, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. And again, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe and like this video and leave me a comment. And I will see you next time for another deep dive into a Hollywood classic.